You're listening to the Love Unplugged podcast, episode 78. Today we're taking a moment to learn about breathwork, a breathing technique that helps you heal past struggles, anxiety, stress, and so much more. It's incredible the power your breath has when used in a certain way to heal you on such a deep level. I love learning about this, and I am adding this practice into my routine, and I hope that it helps you as well. So what am I waiting for? Let's jump right in. Hey there, I'm your host, Jessica Fergon, and I am passionate about doing the inner work needed to reach your goals. Let me be your guide as we navigate all the fears and insecurities that surface when it's time to step outside of your comfort zone. Along with my knowledgeable guests and industry experts, I'm here to teach you how to reawaken your life purpose and passion and create the steps to turn your intentions into action. Ultimately, my goal is to empower you to rise above those blocks holding you back and start living a life that you are worthy and deserving of. So come on, it's time to slow down, find a comfy spot with your favorite organic tea, and get inspired. Thank you for tuning in to the Love Unplugged podcast. Hello, loves. Today I am joined by the lovely Samantha Skelly, a 7-figure entrepreneur, international speaker, best-selling author, wellness coach expert, and breathwork facilitator. She basically does it all. Following her own healing journey, she founded her 2 companies, Pause Breathwork and Hungry for Happiness, to help others overcome their own pain and struggles. And it's her mission to unite humanity by teaching people to breathe, feel, and thrive, which I think is absolutely critical for the time that we are experiencing right now in the world. And I'm just so excited to have you. So welcome, Samantha. I'm so honored to have you as my guest, and I'm so excited to learn all about your story and your business and your advice. But before we start, for those that don't know you yet, I would love for you to share a little bit about you.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm originally from Vancouver, and I started my first company in Vancouver. I was in my little apartment on Homer Street, and it was like this tiny little crappy apartment, and I had this vision to change the way we related to food in our bodies. And so I started Hungry for Happiness about 8 years ago now, with a strong mission to help women who struggle with emotional eating, overeating. And I really struggled between the ages of 18 and 23, with food in my body and exercise addiction and overeating, undereating, and realized as I was going through that journey that it was such a deep emotional issue. And so I began to really do the work from the inside out. So many people were, saying, just control your food and just do this, and, kind of put band-aids on bullet wounds. But I really knew that there was something so much deeper. And so I started on this path of healing, which led me to healing myself. And then now the ability to help thousands of others. And more recently, I started realizing the power of breath work to help people who struggle with emotional eating. And so I started helping my clients, on the Hungry for Happiness side with coming back into their body, understanding the difference between an emotional hunger cue and a physical hunger cue. And breathwork was just such an amplifier to that journey. It just makes everything so much easier for people. So it's been a beautiful journey growing Hungry for Happiness and now Pause.
Amazing. Now I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into your health journey.
Mm-hmm.
When did all these things that you were struggling with start, and kind of what triggered them to begin? And what was that journey like? Like, how long did it take for you to heal, and what did you use if you just discovered breath work, not recently, but, more future wise?
Yeah. So I was a dancer and an actress growing up. So my whole life was spent either on a stage or in front of a camera. And although it didn't manifest as an eating disorder when I was a dancer and an actress, when I stopped dancing and stopped acting, I developed a really unhealthy relationship to food. I write about this story in my new book that's coming out called Hungry for Happiness. But I found myself in a hospital bed in Australia. I got to Australia and started my first diet, which was the cabbage soup diet. And I call that was like the beginning of 4 years, which I call my diet depression years, where I was on over 50 diets in less than 4 years and really struggled to eat like a normal person, really struggled to understand what I was actually hungry for. I did tons of diets, and then I was a fitness competitor as well. When I was living in that crappy little apartment, I would be in the gym for hours a day, getting my reps in, getting my workouts in, getting my cardio in, and it was just such an incredibly unhealthy time. And I knew that I was battling with this disorder, but I really didn't know how to go about it. So I hired, I'd go to therapy, and it was just a lot of talk therapy. So I wasn't really transforming.
Hmm.
And I didn't know it then, but now looking back, it's because I was doing so much thought work and cognitive work and trying to do mindset work. And what it really required was a deep healing from the inside out, like really deep emotional healing, emotional work. And so I ended up finding myself in Bali, and I found breath work randomly. What I wasn't even trying to look for it, but I went to this class and it absolutely blew me away. And I started to feel things in my body that uh, like had been muted and insulated for so long. There was a During this time, the two things I could really feel in my body was numbness or anxiety. And I rediscovered feeling all sorts of things in my system, so many different sensations, so many different feelings, and just really woke up to the aliveness of what it means to be human. And so from that day on, I've just been so obsessed with breath work and teaching it, like deepening my practice, but also teaching it to people all around the world.
Amazing. Now, before we get into breathwork itself, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on how trauma and negative emotions and whatnot get stored in the body.
Mm. So, I mean, if you're human, you're traumatized, right? Like that's kind of what I say. Like we all experience trauma. We all experience trauma, and the severity of the trauma and how the trauma was created, of course, differs. But we all have trapped emotionality in our system that is stagnant and old. And when we use breath in a very particular way, we can begin to go into the body and release the body. And it really does unearth a lot of stuck emotion. We got to feel in order to heal. And when we feel our emotions, we heal them. And the issue is we've just been so suppressed for so long, living up in our heads, trying to think our way out of everything, that we've forgotten our innate ability to heal our bodies through simply just feeling.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Now, what exactly is breathwork? Like, I kind of want to have a better understanding. Is it like certain types of breathing techniques? Like, is it related to meditation? If not, how is it different from meditation?
Mm. So with breath work, so first of all, I was the type of person, I always said, I can't meditate, I can't meditate, I can't meditate. Like I could not figure it out because I would sit there in meditation and my mind would just be so busy constantly, like
Yes.
spinning, 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 spinning. So it it's a type of meditation, but it's not a passive meditation. It's a very active and dynamic meditation. So when we use breath work, we essentially unhook the mind. And we don't unhook the mind by thinking about not thinking, which is what a lot of people are trying to do when they meditate. Like, how can I just think about not thinking? How can I think about my mind not being busy? And that does not work. And if it does, it takes a lot of friggin' practice. But with breath work, we are breathing in a very conscious and continual way, and the mind is releasing because of the breath. And so it allows us to have deeper access to our bodies. It allows us to have deeper access to our feelings, our visceral contractions and expansions. And when we activate the breath and get into the body and we release the mind, that's where true transformation really, really occurs.
Awesome. Okay. That makes sense. Are there different types of breathwork techniques? Like, is there just one type or that you can do and it kind of works for everybody? Or
Mm.
does everybody kind of teach their own methods? Like,
Yeah. So great question. So there's breath work for relaxation and then there's breath work for transformation. So breath work for relaxation is essentially um, any type of breath work where we're not going into an altered state of consciousness. So let me explain. So when we are doing just like in through the nose, out through the mouth, like slow and steady breaths, that would be breath work for relaxation. The intent is to regulate the nervous system, go from that sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic nervous system, really activate that vagus nerve, and just getting ourselves into that rest and digest place. And then there's breath work for transformation. Now, breath work for transformation is when we intentionally stimulate the sympathetic nervous system and we bring a ton of energy into the body so that it releases and then we access deeper states of well being. So, this process can be very intense for people. And so, I'm going to give you an example of like what that would sound like. So, the breath is 2 breaths in and 1 breath out. So, it sounds like this. And essentially, it's that sustained for up to 3 hours, but people normally do it for about 20 minutes. And when we activate that breath, we can get into the body, release a ton of tension, anxiety, stress, overwhelm, and we bring in more well-being into the body. And then the more that we do that, the more we release, the more we create spaciousness in our system. So that would be the difference. And then there's different bodies of work as well. There's like holotropic breath work, there's pause breath work, there's rebirthing, there's a few different essentially companies or methods, and it just depending on what that individual is desiring, each are a little bit different.
gotcha.
Hmm.
Can it be really difficult for the person, practicing breath work, especially when all these things are kind of coming to surface to
Mm,
heal? Like, how
mm,
what is that like when you do have things that need to come out and to heal and whatnot? What does that experience feel like? Is it
mm.
scary?
It definitely can feel a little bit untethering at first, especially when we've suppressed things for so long. But when you start doing breath work, you don't go like super intense right away. You work your way up. So I did it in like a very ass backwards way where I started with a very intense practice. The first breathwork session I ever did was super intense. Then I sort of had to scale back and go a little bit softer and slower. But really, it just really depends on, that person's level of comfort with feeling.
Okay. Is there certain times that breathwork should be used versus like, should it be used like every day, just like a regular practice, or should
Mhm.
you be using it when you actually need it, when you are feeling stressed or you have anxiety?
Oh my gosh, I recommend doing breath work every single day, but it doesn't have to be for like long intense periods every single day. For instance, I do it every day, but in the morning I'll do 5 minutes. And just 5 minutes of like deep breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth in a very like intentional and yeah, just very like intentional and deep way. So like and then what I'll do is throughout my day as well, I'll take 90 seconds and just do a little tune up, just like if I'm feeling emotionally exhausted, or if I feel if I feel like my energy is getting low, or what have you, then I'll really tap into the breath and bring some energy back into my body. And then a few times a week, I'll do like a longer breath work experience. So, like 20 minutes up to an hour, a few times a week. And those are like super deep and powerful. But for someone just starting out, like even 5 minutes a day is like a beautiful place to start. And it's so simple and it's so effective.
Now, I think you're breathing in through your nose and then out your mouth, right?
It depends on the pattern. It definitely depends on the pattern, and there's so many different ways that you can do it. Some of the breath work is like in through the belly, up into the chest, and out through the mouth, and we're only using the mouth. So it really depends.
Okay,
Yeah,
that
it
makes
really
sense.
depends. Hmm.
Now, I would love to hear from your own personal experience, somebody who did have trauma and things that needed to get healed and, started practicing breath work. What have been the benefits for you? How have you seen your life and your health change?
It's really about repatterning old conditioning that's been stuck in our bodies for so long. So it's about like using the breath to unearth a lot of patterns. So for instance, if we have trauma and that trauma is triggered, we can oftentimes view the world from the lens of that trauma. So for instance, if we experience a lot of like the feeling of like being left out and like not being included in things and that kind of stuff, we can view the world through the lens of that. Like for instance, if we're like not invited to something or whatever it is, we can constantly view the world through that lens, and we will feel those feelings of like, I don't feel included, I don't feel like I belong, and like really really digging into like truly feeling as if we're back at where we started. And so those pieces in us are just not matured, they're not evolved, they haven't healed yet. And so what we can do with breath work is we can understand how to move into those parts of us, rewire the story so that we can begin to heal them.
I love that. My mom always used to tell me, when I was in a negative mindset or whatnot, and I was seeing things or I was dealing with some past hurt or whatnot, never to make decisions when you're in that moment because you're
Mm,
seeing everything from that perspective, which
totally.
is most likely not the case in any way.
Totally.
I
100%.
love that.
Mm-hmm.
That's so true.
Yeah.
So, how have you benefited personally from breath work? What has changed internally for you?
Oh my gosh. Oh man, I talk about this all the time with people, but like my entire life has changed because I have a tool that can manage my sensations in any moment of the day. When like that's what life is. It's really about managing our emotional state. And when we're trying to do that with our mind, we just create so much suffering. But when we do that through intent, when we do that through breath, and we do that through using the breath, and rather than identifying with the emotionality, truly just observing it, we can empower ourselves to such a deep level. And so it is, I just tap into it at any point in the day when I'm feeling disempowered, or I'm feeling like I need an anxiety shift, or if I'm like, if I feel like I'm going to react to something, I'll just use breath work, use my breath in a very continual way, and just shift it. And it's just absolutely beautiful.
That's amazing. I love that. Now, you touched on a little bit of what a practice would look like and how you started kind of the backwards way a little bit. But for somebody starting completely brand new with breath work, what are the increments that they should increase? How often a week should they start? Like, what are your recommendations based on what you've seen with your community and how you teach and whatnot?
So I always recommend people. So I have a sort of like a beginner's meditation, essentially, for people who have never tried breathwork. And so if you're listening, you can go to pausebreathwork.com/free audio, and it's like it's just an easy download, and you can go on a little breathwork journey. Um, Otherwise, you can also just do the triactive breath, which is in through the belly, up into the chest, out through the mouth for 90 seconds. And even doing it just for 90 seconds will give your body that felt sense of aliveness and connection. And then if you feel good doing that, then you can start going a little deeper, a little deeper, a little deeper.
Gotcha. Okay. Perfect. Now, I'd love to talk about being an entrepreneur, starting a business. I'd love to hear about your journey in creating your businesses and what that experience was like for you.
Mm. Gosh, I feel like, oh, being an entrepreneur, I never set out to be an entrepreneur. I just had a product that people really wanted. So I kind of fell into it backwards. Entrepreneurship is the greatest personal development journey that I feel like, gosh, between that and my relationship, like such beautiful points of growth. But truly, like my business has been such an incredible way for me to expand. And I think we all come here to expand. We all come here to grow and to allow ourselves to be more realized. And the container of personal development and being an entrepreneur is just so conducive to that growth. Like every single day, I am doing something that's uncomfortable or pushing an edge or getting me out of my comfort zone. Every single day, I'm managing and juggling, a million different things that I otherwise like wouldn't have had the opportunity to do. And so it really, entrepreneurship really shows me, how much power I have. And it shows me and tells me how much more I can handle, and not from like burdening myself, but just from this place of like, wow, I can do hard things, and it is really like it's really fun. And so I always notice myself contracting or like resisting when I'm pushing an edge, but as soon as I like really cultivate, my inner power and just move forward with it, I'm like, oh, this actually is not that hard.
I totally agree. I love that. That's such a great experience. How did you come to the realization that you wanted to start a business, based on breath work and, this healing practice that you've come across?
I honestly did not plan to start a business in breathwork, and it was such an interesting, yeah, it's been such an interesting journey. I knew that there was something else that I wanted to do other than hungry for happiness, but I didn't know what that was, and I could feel it sort of brewing in my body for months. And so I remember being at a mastermind up in LA and driving back home to San Diego, and I was just sort of like talking to myself, and I'm like, what is my next thing that I'm meant to do, that I'm meant to focus on? And it came in so clear, and it was like, you need to teach the world to breathe. And it was from that moment I was like, oh my God, yes, like this is the thing. This is exactly the thing. And the name came right after. It was like, and it's called Pause Breathwork. And it was just such a clear download, and it was so undeniable. And at the time, I was like, okay, I guess this is what I'm doing. And so I just started slowly putting a brand together and creating an Instagram and getting the domain and sharing about it and teaching more about it. And then since then, it's like absolutely blown up to what it is today. But it's been, it's just been like such a gift. But it wasn't something that I like thought about and premeditated on. It just really came to me in like the most beautiful way.
I love that you followed your gut and this nudge that you kind of experienced in the direction you should be going. And I would love to hear, how did you feel when you're like, okay, I'm going to start a business, but this isn't the plan that I had for myself. This isn't something that I originally wanted, and it was most likely a lot of unknown for you in starting a brand new business. What feelings did you experience and how did you navigate them?
It's truly about just using the work and really feeling into that like visceral yes and visceral no. It Our bodies are so incredibly wise, and when we depend on our minds to make our decisions, we can get a little bit like a little bit off track. Um, Before I used breathwork, before I discovered breathwork, I was constantly trying to live my life through my mind and thinking about like what makes sense and just overthinking everything. And when I started using my body to navigate and my breath to navigate, things just really, really opened up. And you know, people just don't realize how powerful they really are, like really, really, really don't realize how powerful they are. And once we can use our breath to feel into our bodies and feel into that inner guidance system, everything becomes so much easier and so much more clear.
Yeah, I love that. Now, I'm dying to know, especially given what you work in, like what your work is all about, how your morning and evenings routines are set up so that you're able to nurture your relationship with yourself, take care of the needs that you have for yourself, but also be able to show up in your business and be able to show up for any other relationships that you have in your life as well. What does that look like?
Yeah, that morning time is like so incredibly precious. So incredibly precious. It's the time to just really tap into myself, find my ground, find my direction, my like internal direction. Um and I allow my routines. I used to be very like structured about my morning routine. Um and now I just allow my routine to be a lot more fluid. So I have a lot more fluidity in my morning routine and really listening to my inner compass, listening to my body. And maybe I want to maybe that morning calls for just some qigong or some intuitive movement, and sometimes it's 20 minutes of breath work and whatever it is. But just that time in the morning is just so precious to recalibrate, get back into my core, get back into my just the clarity of who I am throughout my day. I'm running 3 companies with team members all over the world, so it is, as soon as I log on for the day, there's, questions and just so much energy and so many moving parts. So it's beautiful to spend that time in the morning and just really root in and reconnect to who I am.
And then what about your evening routine? Do you have anything specific that you do for yourself to kind of wind down from the day and turn off all notifications and all your electronics at like dinner time? And, what does that look like in your world?
So Eric and I have we like will delete the Instagram app off of our phone after work. And then we also have a phone box. I'm staring at it right now. So we'll put our phone in our phone box, and when we're not working, we try and be off technology as much as possible. um, and my evening routine is really about reconnecting with the parts of my life that make me feel so alive. So exercise right after work, and then doing something that lights me up. So whether it's surfing or going for a bike ride or doing a hike or whatever it is. And then my evening is breath work to like release the day, going into a little bit of meditation. I love red light therapy, so I'll sit in front of my red light for 20 minutes or so, and then read and do a little bit of journaling, and then go to bed. So I like having structure in the evening.
What is this red light therapy? I'm curious about that now.
It's so awesome. It's basically, it's like bright red light that is really beneficial for inflammation and cellular health and just relaxation. So there's emotional benefits, there's scientific benefits for skin and things like that. But it's just it's very popular in like biohacking right now. So it's very good for inflammation and cellular health.
I'm definitely going to have to look into that because that sounds so interesting to
It's
me.
very, very cool.
Now, given everything that you've learned in your entrepreneurial journey, having 3 companies, what advice would you have for anyone else, starting their own entrepreneurial journey right now, especially, with COVID, where their plans may have changed and they're now looking to start something new?
Get really clear on why you're doing it, and get really clear on what you want the business to do for you. Sometimes we can get so tied into our businesses and we then become a slave to them. So really being mindful of like the integration between business and personal, and asking yourself like how do I want my business to serve me first and foremost. I think that's a piece that like gets missed a lot. So really going back to the drawing board and figuring out like what are the ways in which this business can serve me financially, but then also from a time freedom point of view. Like, is it your vision to, is it, your perfect calendar to work 16 hours a day? Probably not. But like, what does it look like to work 8 hours a day? And when you're working those hours, what do you want to be doing ideally? And what's the results ideally that you want from your business? Because once we have a vision of what we want it to look like, then we can just work backwards. But what happens most of the time is people just don't have any idea of what they want, where they're going, and the result that they want. So it's just sort of like the blind leading the blind. And it's challenging to really get into a place that feels good and sustainable because we're constantly chasing shiny balls and doing the next thing. So that would be the one thing. And then creating like a true business model versus just having a bunch of offers that you randomly launch when you need money. That's really exhausting.
Yes.
So I used to do that. I'm like, oh shit, my bank account is getting low. Like, let me just launch something. And so it wasn't until I created like an actual business model of like going through all three businesses to be like, this business does this amount of money with this profit margin. This business does this business, and like really having a model of like, okay, how do I reach those numbers? What does that look like? What is the team I need? And really engineering it from starting with the end, again, going back.
I love that. I love that advice. That's such great advice. I definitely agree that you need a plan, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can't just kind of aimlessly go into business because that's when you get lost. I mean, I did it when I first started this blog and I had no direction. I didn't really have a full on plan. I just kind of went, with whatever came up, and it
Mm-hmm.
was a nightmare. Like if I actually went into it with a plan and, a business model and, identifying exactly how you want to move forward in your business and what you want to offer and what your goals are and all those types of things, you're going to set yourself up with so much more success.
Totally. It's just so critical. So
Mhm.
important. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Now, I want to talk about these programs or courses that you offer through Breathwork. Sorry, pause for Breathwork, and exactly what you have to offer for Hungry for Happiness as well.
Yeah. So for people who are listening who are interested in breathwork, we have a breathwork facilitator training, which trains people to become masterful facilitators. So all of that information is at pausebreathwork.com/facilitator. For those people who would want to go on a breathwork journey and just use the breathwork on themselves, pausebreathwork.com/journey. And then everything for Hungry for Happiness is at Hungry for Happiness over there, hungryforhappiness.com, which is our coaching training. So it's a certification program to certify people to become food and body coaches. So lots going on, lots of fun.
I love that. So, last question. If anybody wants to learn more about you, where is the best place to connect with you? Where do you hang out the most?
Definitely Instagram. That's my baby. Yeah. At Samantha Skelly.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Samantha, for taking the time to share your story and to educate us on breathwork and how it can help us heal on a deeper level. I know so many are going to benefit from learning about this, and hopefully, it encourages them to include this beautiful practice in their self love journeys. But especially right now, with everything that's going on in the world and all the stress and anxieties and fears and insecurities that we're experiencing, I think that this is such a beautiful tool to add to our tool belt in taking care of what we truly need.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out.
I'm Jessica, and thanks for tuning in today to Love Unplugged, the podcast. If there are any questions or topics you'd love answered on the show, head on over to www.projectloveco.com and share your request with me. If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and share it with a loved one. Your feedback means the world to me, and the community we've created is what fuels our discussions here. After all, this is all for you. Join me next time for another unplugged conversation.